Okay, I think we can probably get started. First, let's just introduce ourselves. I'm Marcy Patterson. I run our solution consulting team here at Blink. As mentioned, I'm generally based out of our Boston office, but I happen to be here in London this week.
And I'm Gavin Gloria. I am head of product engineering here at Blink, and I am based in the London office.
Great. And today we're going to talk about how you can connect and engage with employees who don't necessarily have a digital identity. And in a lot of cases, a digital identity refers to specifically an email address. So no email, no problem. You can still connect and engage with perhaps that frontline workforce that may not have access to an email. So that's what we're really going to talk about today. But let's just sort of frame up the problem as we see it. So, Gavin, I think as you and I have seen, I was talking to you earlier today about when I first joined Blink, which was about 2.5 years ago. I had sort of come from the enterprise software space. And I was really surprised to learn how many organizations don't have a digital identity, sort of the same as an email address, if an email address constitutes a digital identity, but how many organizations don't have an email address for their frontline workers?
I mean, at least what we're seeing working with the kind of organizations that often have people working on the front line or out and about in a van, driving on the road, etc. It's usually 80%, 90% of those wouldn't have any email. Some of our customers they've gotten licenses like Microsoft licenses, but those are obviously quite expensive. So most of the customers that we see, they won't have gone the email route. They won't have created an email because it's just cost prohibitive.
Especially because a lot of those organizations have traditional high attrition. And so trying to both manage that sort of coming and going of employees, as well as the cost associated to what can be a very large constituency, is sort of an obstacle for being able to connect and engage with those employees. But I think there's sort of two sort of impact manifestations that come out of not having that email address. The first is that those employees really struggle to access corporate systems because many of those systems rely on a digital identity. And then the second sort of impact that we see is that there's no way to communicate information to those employees. If you think about how we generally get access to information, if we have to take a security training, if we have benefits enrollment, a lot of that is still done via email. And if these employees don't have an email, they're relying on a frontline manager or perhaps a paper mailer to keep them informed on what's going on within an organization. And that can be very isolating, I think, for the frontline.
Yeah, and not to talk about all the other options and all the other functionality and day-to-day operations, everything that you need to do your job. Essentially, when it comes to trying to bring digital systems into that lack of identity and the lack of digital identity really stops you from doing any of that, which is also a Blink where we're trying to build as much functionality as possible. So you spoke about emails that you send about, well, here's a great slide actually. Some of it is about that informing, is giving you notice of the latest training you've got to do, but it's also about the engagement and just being aware of what's happening, sharing within your team and sharing from the CEO down all this great stuff that's happening in your company, as well as the just day-to-day operational efficiency. How do you get your job done and how do you get access to the things that you need to do? All of that requires some sort of knowing who it is you are, essentially.
Yeah, that's such a good, interesting way to put it. Knowing who I am and sort of that feeling as an employee that the organization knows who I am and cares about me is part of that culture and belonging pillar that you see there. Certainly communication and connection, productivity and tech consolidation you just mentioned, but then sort of that workforce insight pillar. What we see with our customers is once they've created this connection, even without having an email address, being able to create this connection, we're able to provide a lot of analytics on overall employee sentiment, on how employees are feeling as they come, as they onboard in an organization, you know, managing surveys, managing engagement between employees. It just opens up so much more analytics that we're able to gather when we're able to connect to this workforce.
Yeah, and I feel like we've gone really full circle, because this is exactly the kind of ideas that prospective customers come to us with, asking, well, we'd love to do all this, but we don't
can't.
even know where to start.
We don't have
Yeah,
emails.
How do we get them on there? Exactly.
So we're going to talk more about that. Before we jump into the solving for the problem, I'm just going to give a quick demo of Blink, because I don't know that everybody on the phone is familiar with the technology. So I'm going to go ahead and do this off my mobile, and hopefully it's going to go well, because this is really core to my job here at Blink, is being able to demo our software.
I won't judge, Mark.
Thank you. So let me just jump out of here, and I'm going to come into Blink, and I'm going to get rid of our faces. So I'm in Blink on my mobile phone. What you're seeing is the Blink application, and it's been branded for a generic branded organization. The purpose here is just to show you this can really become your employee app. So it can become your primary point of connection to these employees. And so you want it to look and feel like your organization with your colors and your logo. Super easy to do that. I come into Blink, and I'm on the feed, and this is a very social media-like feed, and that's intentional because we want to make this super familiar, so there's not really any training that's required for these employees. They can jump on, and most of them are going to know how to use this just by virtue of what they're using in their social lives at home. But then as I scroll through the feed, I'm getting all sorts of information in a very sort of image-led way. So it's engaging, it's bringing me in, I can like things, I can comment on things, I can hear from the CEO. Lots of organizations now are driving more video content. So being able to jump into a company meeting or just seeing a video from the CEO all within one place. And sort of importantly, it also is going to translate all of this content. So if my phone is set in a different language, I'm going to see this content in the language of my choice. So a lot of great information being fed through the feed. But in addition to the feed, we have secure chat built into the platform. So Gavin, you know, we've all gotten accustomed to using collaboration tools in our work lives. Many of our customers are using Teams or Slack to communicate with each other. But that's another, again, manifestation of this lack of digital identity, is that many of these frontline workers don't have access to those tools. So for chat, they're definitely chatting with each other, but they're probably doing that via
WhatsApp or just through their private phone numbers directly. Yeah,
exactly.
Depends on where you are in the world, but yes. And actually bringing that onto Blink is one of the things we hear that people love. It's just the ability to also bring all those chats, as you say, that are happening anyway, bring them into Blink, and having some control or something over it, at least that is controlled by the company and not on the Wild West, if you will.
Yep, I'm sorry, I was talking too long without moving my phone, so I had to reshare. So we have secure chat. We also have the ability to connect with particular teams or groups. So I can connect to the teams I'm associated to by virtue of my organizational hierarchy, or I can also connect to affinity groups like health and wellness or pets. And you're able to sort of control and manage those communities, but then allow people to ad hoc join those communities. And then finally, on the hub, you're able to get access to those third-party systems. In this case, perhaps I use Workday for HR, and I can link right to Workday from my mobile phone. I can also link right to my payslips. You know, interestingly, Workday could be my payslip provider, but we've created these quick links that are specific to the action, so that as a frontline worker who's not as familiar with enterprise tech, I can click on my HR, I can click on benefits, I can click on payslips. Perhaps those are all bringing me into Workday, but they're bringing me into the specific area of Workday that I'm looking for. So I don't necessarily have to understand what that technology is or how to use it.
And this is also where that identity becomes important, or where that really comes into play, and we're going to talk about this later. But obviously, before we can put you in Workday, we need to know who you are, either through your Workday account if you have one, or at least through some identifier, like a payroll number or something like that. But we'll talk about that in a second, so I won't go into it now.
Sure, because obviously when I click on payslips, you want to make sure I'm getting my payslip and not yours, because that could cause trouble.
That would be less than
Would be
ideal.
disappointing for one of us.
Disappointing, yes.
Yes, yeah. Okay, anything else on the Blink app that you think I should showcase? You know, we're going to talk about this a little bit later as well, but you can see I'm getting a feed notification here for my payslip. So the integration of these different capabilities within each other. So the feed, my payroll is accessible from the hub, but additionally, I'm getting a notification maybe every week or every 2 weeks that my payslip is available. I can click on that right from the feed, and that's just going to open up that item from the hub and let me get right to my payslip.
Yeah, and all of this can be customized. I think is worth pointing out as well. Obviously, different companies have different styles, different identities. Some want to be a bit more image-led, some want to be a bit more text-led or less image-led. But there's all kinds of things we can do here to customize this page to really make it work for you.
Yeah, great example of that is at the top of my screen here, I'm showing stories. And stories are very similar to what you see in Instagram or Facebook when it comes to stories. What we find is some of the organizations that we work with are really leaning into the sort of this enterprise social feel, and they're looking to get those employees engaged, and they might let them share stories within their direct team or a little bit higher. But then some organizations are really using Blink more operationally, and they're turning this stories feature off.
Yeah.
And that's also something you can sort of grow into. Maybe you keep it a little more operationally focused as you get people onboarded, and then as you get the overall feel, the vibe, the ethos, you can start opening up some of these other options moving forward. Good.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And then we'll just talk a little bit more about how we can actually get these users without an email address into and onto Blink, and then some of those other capabilities that you're sort of unlocking once you've done that.
So there's a lot going on this slide, Marcy. We should probably break it down one step at a time. So where do we start? What's on the left? You've got activation authentication.
Yep. So on the left, you sort of have the ability to get users into Blink. And then on the very right, you have what's accessible to users once they're in Blink. So let's start with sort of that activation and authentication piece and getting users loaded into Blink initially and on an ongoing basis. You know, Gavin, we talked about the front line tending to have higher attrition than other organizations, and nobody necessarily wants to maintain this data manually. So just talk a little bit about how we get users loaded into Blink.
Yeah, definitely. So the first step when talking about the core issue here around no email, no problem, and trying to get these people onto the platform is to load some of the information that you've got into Blink to begin with. So that's the user provisioning stage, excuse me, that would always be the first thing to look at, really. So every employee that you've got, they're probably somewhere in a system. So that could be a Workday, that could be an Okta, that could be an Entra, that could be an HR system that you've got ready. And at Blink, over the years, we've seen so many different systems from different customers that we've built many different connectors that are very much plug and play. So you just plug in, for example, the Workday connector, and it means that with a few clicks of a button, you can get all your employee data that's in Workday loaded into Blink. But we've also got a support for things like the enterprise standard SCIM protocol, and I'm always, as a techie myself, surprised, but there's a lot of systems out there that really don't have any way of integrating. And for those, what we typically would do is use a CSV file, the good old CSV file. We just get all the information in a certain structure in the CSV file, and then through an SFTP drive, another 80s, 70s, 60s technical term, you put your CSV in the SFTP, sorry, and then we would just sync that with the Blink system. Now, all of these are all automatic systems, so we would always set it up in such a way that whenever there's a change, it automatically reflects in Blink. But as it says on the slide here, you also do have the manual entry, whether that's to invite, I don't know, a user that isn't in the system, in your HR system, or whether it is just to make changes manually. Those are all options that yeah, we've got available Blink. So this should be fairly plug and play, and it's really about trying to find where that data is and trying to find the best way of getting it into Blink and then keeping things in sync.
And one of the things that we know is that for a lot of our customers, this data could be in different places. So we talk about Entra, desk-based employees who have a digital identity, their profile data may be in Entra, and we can import that or connect to that through that Entra connector. But then their frontline employees or their non-salaried employees may only be in their payroll system. And so for those employees, we're connecting to that. So all of that data doesn't have to be in one place. And part of our services is certainly our implementation team working with our customers to figure out where that data is, the best mechanism for getting it into Blink, and then the mechanism for making sure it stays up to date as the data changes.
Yeah, and that's more often than not, actually, we see multiple systems being involved in getting all the employees' information into Blink.
Yeah.
So yeah, very common.
So once that data is into Blink, then we need to activate those users. So we load the information in, and now we have to invite those users. This is, again, one of the common obstacles that organizations have because they don't have a mechanism for inviting the users in because they don't have email. So talk a little bit about how we get the users into Blink, them activated into Blink is how we like to refer to it.
Right. I mean, this was basically the longest intro that we could have done to getting to the crux of the problem, which is you've got your information loaded, and what you'll see is typically there's desk-based workers, as you said, the ones that have Entra or Microsoft accounts, they will have an email because that's probably how they log in, or at least a login or some username they log in with. But probably also an email. So that's maybe 20% of your workforce, let's say. And then you'll have a part of your workforce that you've got a phone number, or that really depends from customer to customer, but you'll have a part of it, 20, 30%, another 20, 30% that have as a phone number. Now, for those, we try to keep things simple. The best thing that we found is we send an SMS to the phone number with a personal invite link that when you tap it or click it, it will take you through the whole flow, essentially. It will take you to the App Store. It will get you to download the Blink app, and it will put you straight in the right place. We already know your phone number. So all we really got to do is just send that phone number a quick text message with a secure 6-digit code, and then we know who you are. We've verified your phone number, and you're into the platform.
You're essentially credentialed into Blink.
Yeah, and using that phone number. So if we've got a phone number and that's something we can use, then great. That's what we definitely like to use. The harder, or where some of the secret sauce for us comes in, is where we don't have an email, obviously, but also we don't have a phone number.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah. I kind of kept in my percentages about 60%, if my math is correct.
Yeah.
Which is actually often the case. So there, we've got QR codes that we work with a lot, especially since COVID. Everyone knows what a QR code is. Before that, it was a lot harder because we had them before that, but now everyone knows what that is. We've got QR codes that you can either signpost, so you can put them on a big poster somewhere on the wall, in the cantina, or in any common space. Anyone can scan those, and what happens then is, given that everyone can scan them, we do need to somehow verify who you are. So we will use some personal information about you. So you'll be loaded up into this little site or in this little app, and in that app we will ask you some information about you that we can agree up front. And once you've verified, okay, only I know, for example, my employee number and some other secure question about myself, then we can get you in the app. We also have QR codes that don't require that, where it's just you scan the QR code and it's one that's your QR code. So it's like a secure QR code that's personal to you. But the most exciting one, I think, of all of these options is the manager activation one, which is, I think, a feature that we see more and more customers using it since we've built it. And it's a great way to leverage your middle management to get your employees that you don't have any data or any number or phone number for activated onto Blink.
Yeah, I think what we've found is that in organizations with a predominantly frontline workforce, that frontline manager is really key to the operational efficiency of those employees. So leveraging that manager to sort of onboard their employees has been very successful for us and for the managers. It first of all sort of pushes the bar on the managers to get them into the system, using it and engaging with their employees to get those employees onto the system. It also allows us to do a little bit of gamification. Everybody likes a little competition, so that being able to compare manager activation across different areas and say, hey, so-and-so in this area has got 80% and you're only on 60. What can you do to beat them? So a little bit of gamification, and then also building that gamification into Blink. We talked about the feed posts, and we have the ability to send a feed post to a particular manager that says, you're at 60% activation. Here are the 10 employees that still haven't activated. Go ahead and try to get them activated. So being really deliberate about leveraging the extended team to help drive that engagement. And what we have found is that it's actually very successful. If you look at our adoption across our customers, Gavin, we have 87% adoption or activation of Blink. And we find the majority of our customers do not make downloading Blink mandatory. And that's another webinar.
Yeah, because it's personal phones, and you can't.
Exactly. They're using personal devices. There's compensatory and non-compensatory concerns. So again, we can talk about that as a future webinar. But so we like to say, 80 to 90% adoption is really good. And us getting to 87% adoption across our customer base with 72% monthly average usage and over 53% daily average users. So half of our users are logging into Blink every day, and that's really sticky. So those activation mechanisms for what you were saying, 60% of our customers, that's a little bit of a pulled out of your hat, but 60% not having email addresses are seeing this level of adoption. I really think talks to the effectiveness of the approaches we've created.
Well, these numbers are not pulled out of my head.
No, these are.
Just to clarify, these are real numbers, and because we were talking before this about them, and yeah, they're unbelievably high. I think on the 87%, it's probably worth noting as well that it's always a combination of different strategies, because we had that slide where we talk about all the different ways, the QR codes, using the mobile numbers, obviously using email for those that have email, if that's what they're used to. But it's always a combination of trying to find what's right, and sometimes trying to different approaches for the same person just to get them on. Maybe they ignore the QR code that is on the wall in the canteen, but maybe they don't ignore the manager coming to them because they're trying to compete with the person next to them.
And probably, again, worth saying is we talked a little bit about implementation, working with our customers to get that data loaded. From an analytics perspective, this is also something we're really tracking and measuring on the back end and providing insights to our customers on where activation is lagging behind, giving them ideas as to how to impact activation. And quite frankly, we put ourselves out there a bit. If you have a manufacturing plant, we'll put some people on site and get them with the QR codes, activating people in if there's a particular site whose activation feels a little bit low. So definitely something we take extremely seriously throughout not only our implementation, but even our customer success. And I do think the numbers speak for themselves. But now let's talk about, we've got people in, we've got them activated, yay. What else can you do? And we've talked about a few of these use cases already, but one of my favorite stories is a sort of a logistics organization that we worked with, and their employees did not have email addresses. And in order for them to ask for time off, they had to fill out a paper form. They had to get that paper form to their manager. The manager would then type that into a system, and then that would send an email to the manager who would approve that request. But then the employee never got a notification that that request was approved. So it was just a really manual, broken process. And when they calculated the amount of time and effort was spent sort of managing this, it really was a problem that paid for itself once we automated that through Blink.
Yeah, before I worked at Blink, I didn't know how much the mail costs.
Yeah.
As in, sending hundreds or thousands of letters. It turns out it adds up.
Yeah, that's a great use case for benefits enrollment. Now, I know not all frontline employees necessarily have access to the same benefits that a salaried employee has, but many of them are still going through some type of benefits cycle. Even from a change management perspective, one of the other things I learned through the 2.5 years that I've spent here at Blink is that organizations change payroll providers quite often. And you can imagine the change management impact of changing payroll providers when you don't have a great way of communicating that information to the folks who are most likely looking at those payslips most often. So I had shown on the hub earlier that you had a payslip button. What can really be impactful is if you're changing the systems on the back end, the front end experience doesn't have to change for the end user. Again, they don't necessarily know or care what ServiceNow is or what Workday is or what SuccessFactors is. They just want to get to their benefits information. They want to get to their payroll information. So abstracting some of that complexity through the hub and through those direct connects can be super impactful. And then this slide is talking even sort of taking that a little bit further, where we can act as sort of the enhanced notification engine. So I mentioned ServiceNow. We know that a lot of customers are leveraging ServiceNow for IT ticketing or for HR ticketing. Those frontline employees may not have the ability to interface with that ServiceNow ticketing systems. They could be entering a ticket through the phone. We can actually become sort of that enhanced notification engine so that if I open a ticket through this feed card integration, we can send the employee an update. It says your ticket's been received, there's been an update to your ticket, click here to open your ticket. We talked earlier about Workday training. You have a new compliance training that needs to be taken. Click here to open up that training. So it really just improves the overall experience for the employee in making sure they're getting done the things they need to get done.
Yeah, what this slide is showing is essentially the toolbox that we've built. So we call it CarKit, but it's a little toolbox that allows you to just almost in a what you see is what you get kind of drag and drop kind of way create these cards essentially. And as you said, they can come from third-party systems. They can come from something like ServiceNow, but we also see a lot of uses for just other updates that are not necessarily coming from a system, but something you want to automate for another reason. And maybe you want to personalize it as well. And yeah, you've got some options here. You can make it interactive. You can link people through. You can personalize it. So there's a lot of options here, and we're always on hand to help as well to unlock further potential.
And I think what's interesting when you think about sort of ServiceNow or Workday or SuccessFactors or Dayforce, what you were saying earlier about you need to know who somebody is. You need to have a digital identity. So by onboarding that user into Blink, we're actually essentially credentialing them. And then Blink can act as the IDP, the identity provider, to launch into those third-party systems. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, Gavin?
Yeah, so there's two, because we've got a mix of the type of users logging in. So some users will log into Blink or will authenticate into Blink with their existing identity. So that could be an Okta account, that could be a Microsoft account, that could be something else. Google is another example here. And then a lot of other employees that might not have those licenses, they have then the option of using the Blink identity as their digital identity, if you will. And what this slide is ultimately saying is because Blink is such a great place to signpost all of these integrations and all of these systems, it really allows you to have Blink as the one app, because we haven't spoken about that, but all of these systems, they have their own apps as well. But definitely the feedback that we've gotten is
too many apps.
Too many apps.
Too many
exactly.
apps.
Especially when it's about work. It's not for your personal life, it's for work. So having just one app where everything is just signposted. And what we do is we use single sign-on using the industry standard SAML 2.0 protocol to sign you into all of these systems. So it just means that you can rely on your Blink identity to get you into, there's a few examples here, things like Workday, things like ADP, SuccessFactors, which I saw was a question. So yes, the answer is we do integrate with SuccessFactors, and we have successfully integrated with SuccessFactors, but not intended, with a few of our customers. Green Road, ServiceNow, there's a lot of tools that we've integrated with over the years. And we see a lot of use. And the two, we haven't really mentioned this, but the two, everything we said about engaging communication And everything that we're talking about now, which is more about just getting access to all the right systems and tools that you need to get your job done or to get your payslip, they really interact well, because getting into Blink because you've got a new payslip or because you need to have a look at putting a request in, it just puts you so close where the action is, if you will. And it makes it so appealing to then have a quick look to see what's going on in the feed and seeing if there's any great, I don't know, stories or any great feed posts shared.
One of the things that I like to do occasionally is to go onto G2 and just search for Blink and see what's being said. And if you search for Blink and search for Game Changer, you'll see how many organizations have actually gone on to G2 and talked about how Blink has been a game changer for their organization for precisely a lot of the reasons that we've talked about: communication, engagement, and access. And what's interesting is that impact is sort of felt across the entire organization. We haven't really drilled into the different departments and how they're influenced by an app like Blink, but HR from a retention and attrition perspective, operations in being able to improve manager productivity, just communications across the organization, and then IT, because we're making this a much lighter lift. And so improving productivity for IT, if you look at some of the other systems in this space that take a lot of management, a lot of administration, Blink is pretty lightweight.
Yeah. No, we take all of that. I mean, really, it's a launch pad for your IT department, and it should be a very easy way to extend the reach of your IT systems really to 100% of your workforce, and not just the ones that happen to have an email address.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and go to some of the questions. I'm gonna to let you know that I can't read a thing on that screen, so I'm gonna rely on you.
I'll be moderating this.
Okay, perfect.
So the first question that we've got is: do deskless workers need a Workday license to use Blink and the Workday time tracking? And I think this is probably not just about Workday, because there's a lot of these systems that we've been talking about, but it's a great question in terms of, do they need a license to ultimately use these systems and to make benefit of them?
I mean, it's not necessarily. So we get this question a lot with SharePoint, right? Because we can give frontline employees access to SharePoint files through Blink. And the question is, do you need a SharePoint license for that user when you showcase them, give them access to those files? It's really a SharePoint question. And in this case, it's really a Workday question. You'd have to talk to your Workday rep as to what the licensing requirements are. We're giving access to them. I would have to guess yes, because particularly if we're giving them access to a payslip, if we're giving them access to their benefit information, they have to be a user in Workday. I don't know if a user and a license is the same thing with Workday, so probably a better question for your Workday rep.
Yeah, a great way to look at the question like that would be, do you need to know who the user is? So when Marcy's talking about SharePoint, for example, what we're doing is we're taking files and folders and documents from SharePoint and we're giving you a preview, but we don't need to know who you are to show you a preview. We just need to know that you're authenticated in some way with Blink. Whereas with Workday, it depends on what you're trying to do, but you're probably trying to somehow give them something that's personal to them. So in that sense, you're going to have to identify them in Workday. And that's an integration that we can definitely set up. We can use the SAML protocol that we were talking about to identify anyone really, whether they have an email or not, in Workday, using the identity they have for, in Blink. But we can also use an existing, like an Entra or an Okta, if you've got that, and a combination thereof. I think there's a bit of a theme here. There's a lot of options.
Yeah, and I think for the Workday question specifically, we'll we have a great relationship with Workday. We can track that answer down ourselves and follow up too.
Great. The next question is, do you integrate with UKG? I think there's a quick one here.
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do, and we have.
Yeah, we have a lot of customers who use UKG. You know, let's just sort of poke that a little bit, because integration, what we're generally doing is using UKG for user provisioning. So connecting to UKG to get that user data. And then the other thing we're doing is connecting to UKG to perhaps give somebody their schedule, right? So I could have a schedule button in the hub. I click on that and it goes into UKG to show me my schedule. We do have optionality to do even a deeper integration if you wanted to give sort of some shift swapping capabilities in Blink and integrate those shift requests into UKG. That would be a deeper discussion. So the integration we currently tend to do is through that user provisioning and then that sort of third-party access from the hub.
I think what's interesting is you've gone through the steps exactly as we go through them on every customer, which is first we look at each of these systems in terms of, do we need to get any data from them into Blink so that we can drive Blink functionality using that data? So it's always about getting the information into Blink first. The second one is always about, can we use something like a single sign-on to get in our hub in Blink a quick way into that system and into, as you said earlier, a specific area within a UKG or within a Workday. And then the third and final is where we usually, when Blink is already deployed and everyone's already on Blink, we start talking about what else can we do? How can we deeper integrate it? Because we would get great benefits from having a deeper integration with, for example, a UKG.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, very much the order of sequence of how we see these things unfold. The next question is very similar. Do you integrate with SuccessFactors, which similar to UKG and similar to everything we just said? So yes.
I think you mentioned during the discussion on the user provisioning, any organization that uses SCIM protocol, it's a very straightforward integration. If they don't have SCIM, most modern technologies do, then we can do an SFTP. And then for third-party access, they need to be SAML 2.0 compliant. So those are sort of the defining factors in those integrations.
Yeah. Anyone that's got any of those, as you said, the answer is yes, in short.
And you know, from a third-party access perspective, I remember a customer I worked with early on in my tenure at Blink. You know, as a user, you know, as an employee of any company, you know, there are benefits that are like maybe it's a 401k and you have to go to Fidelity. Maybe it's your dental plan and you have to go to Delta Dental. What we found for these employees is that even giving shortcuts to those systems from Blink, now you're probably most likely using your own identity there. You're still logging into those, but I often forget who my dental provider is. So having a button that says Delta Dental or Dental and letting me click on that, it's just still sort of reduces the friction for an employee who just may not have a lot of understanding of the benefits available to them.
As long as you don't forget your dentist is, Marcy.
Well, it changes.
That's not really. The next question is, how is this data protected? Great question to begin with. If you're transferring from Workday where confidential information is housed, how does that work? I mean, there's different ways to answer this, really. From a technical point of view, obviously we use all the standard encryption, whether that's the data that we store or whether it's the data going across the wire in the network. We're not doing anything different really than all the best companies out there in terms of security. We have a lot of certifications as well that we adhere to, which requires us to follow a set of standards. So we're looking at SOC 2. We also have we're HIPAA compliant. We're
Cyber Essentials Plus.
Cyber Essentials Plus.
ISO 27001.
Exactly. So there's a lot of practices ensure that we follow to make sure that data is
GDPR
is protected. Yes, GDPR. And we obviously keep your data completely separate from any other customer we've got. So there's never ever any overlap in that sense. In terms of operationally the information, so you can also control within Blink what information is visible to users. Because, for example, a great example here is if there is certain personal information that you pull across, you have a user profile in Blink that you can see, you can look anyone up, but you can hide any information that you don't want people to see. So we give you a lot of customizability, if you will, where you can decide who can see what. And within the Blink platform as well, there's different administration levels that allow you to, again, see different things, but not see other things. So there's a combination of things, really.
Yeah. So a couple of quick examples of where that sort of comes into play. We talked about chat and having secure chat on the platform. And as I said earlier, a lot of these employees are probably chatting with each other, even if they're not doing it on an employer platform.
Yeah.
And so what we know happens is they're creating chat groups. And if somebody leaves the organization, they could still be in that chat group. So being in Blink, you're actually more secure, because if you're using Blink Chat and the individual leaves the organization, they're no longer going to be in that chat group. That's going to happen automatically. The other thing we've heard is that employees don't always want to share their mobile numbers with other employees. So you can chat in Blink without having to share those numbers. And in fact, to what you said, Gavin, those numbers can be obfuscated. Obfuscated, hidden.
They can be hidden, yeah.
So that somebody doesn't have access to my mobile number.
And actually, you can also call people now, and for this very reason. So we've recently, or we're introducing, I should say, the product team is going to kill me after this. We're introducing video calling and just calling is the worst thing. Getting a phone call from Blink. But it means that you don't need to know, like I don't need to know our CEO's phone number anymore. Not that I do, but I don't have to know it now. I can just press on the call button in Blink and I can get them on the phone.
Of course, you're going to have some people who are going to say, I don't want my entire employee base being able to call my CEO.
And then you can turn it off. Yeah, it really depends on on your use case and what the problems you're trying to solve.
I think what we find is for frontline employees in particular, if you need to get in touch with your manager, how are you doing that today? The ability to click on a button and call that manager, or do a quick incident call. If you need to bring 3 or 4 people into a group call, you can do that all on the platform. You don't have to have another platform, and it's happens very quickly and easily.
We've got a lot of questions to get through, and
we only have about 3 more minutes.
Right. So we'll try and do as many as we can.
Yeah, and then the other ones we'll follow up separately for sure.
Are we talking about the employer providing employees' personal mobile number or email address? What's the justification in GDPR for doing this? Surely the only legitimate approach is a voluntary one, example given a QR code. So this is really about GDPR and using personal email and or phone number.
Yeah, and I think that's where we talked about this being, most organizations don't make this mandatory. And so it's optional for an employee to download Blink and perhaps provide a mobile number if they choose to, but then a QR code or manager activation. With the manager activation, you're essentially relying on the manager as the validation of the employee. And so you're not necessarily providing any type of personal information.
And is there anything to say about the numbers that we store that are personal phone numbers ultimately in terms of GDPR? So we are storing that information because we needed to re-authenticate you. I'm sure there's loads of customers along the way that will have raised concerns about this.
About the GDPR and storing those phone numbers. I think because they're hidden and not made available, but again, the employee can choose whether to download the app and enter that phone number. If the phone number's entered, it's not shared.
Yeah, and we don't use it in Blink for definitely any marketing. That's definitely not what we're into. We don't use any personal information for anything really, other than to show it if you want to show it, which is completely in your control. Can the authentication happen using any authenticator? Microsoft, Google. So I can take this one. Yes is a short answer. So we have out-of-the-box integrations with both Microsoft and Google, which is very much just a click. But you can also set up using authentication. You can also set up using SAML, and both Microsoft and Google have SAML, support the SAML protocol. So there's multiple options with both Microsoft and Google, but most of the common ones we will have integrated with in the past.
Okta, SecureAuth.
Yeah, I can't think of any other right now. You're putting me on the spot. All of them.
Perfect. Why don't we do one more, Gavin? Make it a good one.
Oh. I feel like we can do a little machine gun, just go through them just one by one. Are you available on desktop or just mobile? We're available on both, and they're great on both. They're native applications on both.
Same, the look and feel is quite similar too. So it transitions really well for employee who is using it on the desk, but wants to bring it on the mobile too. It's a super easy transition. And on the desktop, it can be downloaded as a desktop app, or it can just be a web app.
All right, machine gun,
Sorry,
Marcy. Yeah.
go.
Do you integrate with SAP SuccessFactors?
Yes.
Where is the data stored? It depends. There's different regions. We support currently Europe, Australia, and the United States.
AWS.
AWS, yes, we use Amazon Web Services. So again, something we can discuss and agree with you. And a final one, how can Blink help us create real-time feedback loops between frontline staff and CX teams to surface rider pain points without relying on surveys or emails?
I would love to talk about that. That's going to be a longer answer, but we can absolutely help. And there's a lot of creative ways, some really interesting customer stories too, as to how they're using employee data to influence customer satisfaction and also sort of vendor satisfaction. So providing feedback to different services that employees are taking advantage of. Really, I'll just tell one really quick story. We had a customer who had an employee discounts program, and they hadn't really touched it in maybe 18 months, but they put it into Blink when we launched, and they found that it was one of the most often clicked things in the hub. Based on that, they realized they needed to invest in that employee discount program because it was meaningful to the employees. So there's all sorts of feedback loops that we can capture just based on behavior and sentiment, and then we'd have to look at tying that into the CX use case that's mentioned by this particular participant.
That's a good one. I love a discount. So
There you go.
I completely get that one. The other two questions are about cost, and I think we'll just follow up with some more information about cost. I think that's it, Marcy. We're up on the end.
Yeah, I think the only other thing we wanted to mention was we have another webinar coming up. Also, there's a poll, so please answer the poll. And then we have an upcoming webinar on our latest product features. So if you're interested in Blink, connect with us through that webinar. You can see some of our great capabilities being delivered by our product team. And thank you, everybody, for attending and participating today. Have a great day.
Have a great day.